Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. China is suffering a power crisis, so it asked coal factories to increase output. Then massive floods hit the province of Shanxi. It's the biggest coal-producing region in the country. 2 million people have been hit. Hundreds of coal factories have been shut down. The power crisis has worsened. Prices of coal have shot up further. Industrial production has been hit harder. China is looking to import coal. Disruptions in manufacturing are hitting everyone. The world is paying the price for dependence on China, and China is paying the price for building too many dams. This country alone has more than 90,000 dams. They cause floods every year, cause devastation worth millions. It's a cycle that the government of Xi Jinping fails to break. How long can they keep hurtling from one crisis to another? How big is this round of floods in China, and how much worse are the crises of China set to become in the weeks and months ahead? We'll discuss on Gravitas tonight. Also on the show, the G20 holds an emergency meeting on Afghanistan. Their big challenge is this: how do you help Afghans without helping the Taliban? Russia and China skipped the meeting. We'll tell you what Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi said. Weeks after the first Quad summit in Washington, D.C., the Quad navies meet in the Bay of Bengal for the Malabar exercise. We'll tell you what's happening there. Donald Trump's diplomatic gifts are under investigation. Some valuable gifts are missing. Also, did the Saudis gift Trump fake cheetah fur? And Superman is now bisexual. DC fans are divided on how woke a superhero should be. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
The International Monetary Fund has lowered China's growth forecast for 2021 to 8% and 5.6% for 2022, while India's growth projection has been increased to 9.5% for the current year and pegged at 8.5% for 2022. At the virtual G20 summit, the European Union has announced a $1.2 billion aid package for Afghanistan, aimed at averting a major humanitarian and socio-economic collapse. For the third time in the last 3 weeks, China's Evergrande Group has missed bond payments. This has intensified market fears over the spread of the crisis to other property developers. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has claimed that COVID-19 protocols prevented him from attending a football match, saying he was denied entry as he was not yet vaccinated. Sami Jassim, one of the ISIS group's top financial chiefs with a $5 million bounty on his head, has been captured at an unnamed location by Iraqi intelligence officials. Jassim had served as one of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's key deputies. A UK parliamentary report on the handling of the pandemic finds its initial response was one of the worst public health failures in UK's history. The report also finds that the delay in implementing the first lockdown cost lives. Thailand Prime Minister announced plans to fully reopen the country to vaccinated tourists traveling by air from countries deemed low risk from next month, citing the urgent need to heal the kingdom's ailing economy. The lava flow from a volcano on the Spanish island of La Palma has hit a cement factory and industrial estate. 3 weeks since its eruption, the volcano continues to spew endless streams of lava. Germany have become the first team to punch their ticket to the 2022 FIFA World Cup. The four-time world champions brushed aside North Macedonia 4-0 to open up an unassailable 8-point lead at the top of the group with 2 games to play. All 4 goals came in the second half, with Timo Werner netting a brace and Kai Havertz and Jamal Musiala also on target. Jon Gruden has resigned from his role as head coach of the NFL side Las Vegas Raiders after the surfacing of multiple old emails in which he used racist, misogynistic and homophobic language. A former Super Bowl winner with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Gruden sent the emails in question while he was working as an analyst and commentator between 2010 and 2017.
They say when it rains, it pours. Well, ask China. It's pouring troubles for China. A dwindling economy, a power crisis, and now floods. Devastating floods. Millions have been displaced. Thousands of homes have been swept away. The images capture the crisis. Look at this one. How heavy rains triggered a landslide in northern China. That happened 6 days ago, what you just saw. And since then, the floods have only become more ferocious. And this is a story that keeps repeating itself in China. Last year, it was Hubei, when record-breaking floods brought the Three Gorges Dam to the brink of collapse. This time, Shanxi is suffering. Last week, torrential rains hammered this province. They led to floods and landslides. Almost 2 million people have been affected. More than 70 districts and cities have been hit. And this has come as a double whammy for China. This province, Shanxi, is one of the main sources of coal for the country. China, we know, is already suffering from a power crisis. Now Shanxi is flooded, and that will make the situation worse. How much worse? And how does this affect you, no matter which part of the world you're in? That's what we'll discuss tonight. First, look at the pictures. They come from the Chinese state media. Even they cannot brush this crisis under the carpet. Look at these images. You see 2 men inside a structure downhill, totally unaware that a landslide is coming. They narrowly escape death. Not everyone has been as lucky as them. Many people have been trapped in these landslides. Here's one victim being pulled out of the mud. Now look at what happened outside a city near Shanxi. A bus fell into a river. The river was flowing over a bridge. At least 3 people died, 11 are missing, 37 passengers managed to survive. They had to go on top of the bus to save themselves. What's the scale of this destruction? At least 1.75 million people are affected. 19,500 homes have collapsed. 120,000 people have been forced to relocate. These floods have caused a direct economic loss of at least $770 million in China, and Beijing is getting used to such numbers. Between 1989 to 2018, close to 200,000 Chinese citizens have died in natural disasters. More than $1 trillion have been lost. Floods happen every year in this country. The reason are China's dams. China has 94,000 dams. 94,000. They were built mostly in the 1970s. They're causing rivers to swell. They're causing floods. In 2020, China experienced 21 large-scale floods. The Chinese press described this as a historical record, quote unquote. China had not seen so many floods since 1998. Towards the end of the year, a total of 833 rivers flowed above warning levels. And the trend seems to have continued into 2021. So the Chinese have got used to living with the floods. What they're not used to is power cuts. And we've been reporting on how a majority of provinces in China are experiencing power cuts. A big reason for that is a shortage of coal. Power generation companies need coal to produce electricity, but they don't have enough coal. Shanxi, the flooded province, is a major hub for coal. It produced more than 1 billion tons of coal in 2020. Now, the floodwaters have forced coal mines to shut down. On the 4th of October, 27 coal mines suspended operations in Shanxi, but last Friday, local authorities were forced to shut down more than 400 mines. The writing is on the wall. The floods in Shanxi will worsen China's power shortage. The country's wealthiest province has issued a warning. That's the province of Liaoning. It has issued a power shortage alert, the 5th one in 2 weeks. Reports say there is a demand gap of up to 20%, meaning the demand is up to 20% less than the supply. The real struggle is for Chinese businesses. They have received some unprecedented diktats. Some provinces have ordered factories to shut for a few days every week. Employees have been asked to use stairs instead of lifts. Offices are being pressured to avoid using air conditioners at low temperatures. Factory owners are now turning to diesel generators to keep their businesses going. The crisis is only expected to get bigger with more blackouts in the coming months and no heating during winter. It doesn't look good. So what's the government doing? Local officials in Shanxi are under pressure to stabilize coal supplies. The vice governor of this province has issued an order to coal producers. They've been asked to, quote-unquote, ensure energy security and guarantee a stable coal supply. But the suppliers are helpless. They can't do very much until the floodwaters recede. Guess who else is helpless? The G20 or the Group of 20. They have the money, they have the clout, but they don't have a consensus. Earlier today, the G20 held a special summit on Afghanistan. 3 things were discussed. Number 1, humanitarian support to Afghanistan. Nearly 18 million Afghans need foreign assistance. What's the best way out to help them? The best way to help them, rather. Number 2, the fight against terrorism. Under the Taliban, terrorists are regrouping. The likes of ISIS Khorasan are plotting deadly attacks. But the Taliban has no counter-terror strategy. And number 3, freedom of movement and open borders. Hundreds of Afghans want to flee the country. Will the Taliban let them leave? Now, these 3 key issues were discussed by the G20. Why are these talks important? Because the G20 has something the Taliban desperately need, and that's money. The G20 make up 90% of the world's gross output, almost 80% of world trade, and 2/3 of the world population. That's a lot of representation, a lot of power. Unfortunately, that also means a lot of differences. This summit was hosted by the current G20 chair, which is Italy. But 2 key players were missing: China and Russia. They did not attend today's meeting. President Vladimir Putin and President Xi Jinping did not participate because they think the G20 is interfering. Now, most members are using financial assistance as leverage with the Taliban. They want to see actions from the Taliban, whether on women's rights or political reform or counter-terrorism. And India is among those countries. Prime Minister Narendra Modi participated in this special G20 session and he spoke on 5 specific issues. Number 1 is the historic ties between India and Afghanistan. These relations go back many centuries. They continue even today. The Prime Minister talked about the 500 plus Indian projects in Afghanistan. They have created jobs for Afghan women and youth. The second point he highlighted is the need to continue humanitarian aid. Prime Minister Modi said that every Indian feels the pain of the Afghan people. He had a clear message for the global community: ensure immediate and unhindered access to humanitarian assistance. Number 3, tackling terrorism. And this is something that India has repeatedly talked about. Afghan territory must not be used for terrorism, regionally or globally. The Prime Minister called for a joint fight against the nexus of radicalization and drugs. Number 4, an inclusive government in Kabul. This means women and minorities in key government positions. That's the only way to preserve the gains of the last 20 years, to contain and defeat radicalization. And the 5th point he made was on a unified global response. No regional cliques, no exclusive groupings, a common global strategy for Afghanistan. Prime Minister Modi said that without such a strategy, it will be difficult to bring change in Afghanistan. Now, these are concrete proposals. The problem is, not everyone in G20 agrees. Take China and Russia, for example. They want sanctions to be lifted. They want Afghanistan's foreign reserves to be unfrozen. But these countries are in a minority, thankfully. Their opinion is unlikely to be popular at the G20. At least that's the indication. The Taliban's godfather, Pakistan, was not even invited to the meeting. Neither was Iran. Only Qatar made it to the G20 summit, and their relations with the Taliban seem wobbly. On Tuesday, a senior Qatari official said that recognizing the Taliban regime is not a priority at the moment. They're more focused on the humanitarian situation. In fact, most countries are. The European Union kicked off the G20 summit with a big pledge, a $1.2 billion aid package for Afghanistan. And just to be clear, this is humanitarian aid. This is not development aid. That money, development aid, continues to remain frozen. So how will these funds reach the Afghan people? Not through the Taliban. The funds will be used by international aid agencies working on the ground. Some of it will be given to Afghanistan's neighbors as well. The timing of this G20 meet is very important. Both the US and the EU are trying to get a measure of the Taliban. Earlier today, the delegations met in Doha. On one side, the Taliban's foreign minister, Amir Khan Muttaqi, and on the other, envoys from the US and the European Union. The Taliban had two demands from them: diplomatic recognition and financial assistance. Now, at the G20, they did not get either. They cannot touch the humanitarian aid, and they're not willing to reform for diplomatic recognition. Remember, Afghan schools reopened 24 days back, but there are no girl students. Only boys can attend school under the Taliban. So it's a delicate situation for the G20. How do you help Afghans without helping the Taliban? That's the question they're dealing with. Direct humanitarian aid is a temporary fix, but right now it's the only option. It's too early to lift sanctions, to unfreeze foreign assets. And it's definitely too early to discuss diplomatic recognition. Now, the Bay of Bengal is witnessing some high-voltage military maneuvers. Warships, fighter jets, choppers, submarines, they've all assembled in India's backyard. What are they doing? They're taking part in a mega war game. It's called the Malabar exercise, a cornerstone of the Quad. The second phase of the 25th edition is underway. It kick-started on Tuesday morning. It will continue all the way till Friday. So who's taking part in this exercise? The navies of all four Quad nations: the Indian Navy, the Royal Australian Navy, Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Forces, and the United States Navy. They're all taking part in this complex naval drill. Like I said, it's the second phase of the exercise. The first phase was held in August this year near the coast of Guam in the Philippine Sea. The second phase promises to be bigger than the first one. All four countries have sent their best vessels and aircraft. The Indian Navy has deployed two frontline ships. The first is INS Ranvijay. It's a Rajput-class destroyer that has been in service since 1988. The second one is INS Satpura, a Shivalik-class stealth frigate. It was commissioned in 2011. Plus a fleet of P-8I long-range maritime patrol aircraft. It's also taking part. The United States has sent the USS Carl Vinson. It's a Nimitz-class super aircraft carrier, the one that buried Osama bin Laden at sea. Then we have the USS Lake Champlain. It's a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser, and USS Stockdale, an Arleigh-Burke-class guided missile destroyer. Like we said, the best in their arsenal. Next, we have Japan's maritime forces. They too have sent some state-of-the-art vessels, including their multi-purpose operation destroyer, JS Kaga. And the lead vessel of the Murasame-class destroyers, the JS Murasame. The Royal Australian Navy has sent the HMAS Ballarat. It's an Anzac-class frigate that has taken part in multiple naval missions globally, and the HMAS Sirius, a fleet replenishment vessel. Now, these are some big toys carrying out some complex drills to deter a dangerous adversary. And that's China. Much like last year, this year's Malabar Exercise 2 is aimed at checking China's expansionism in the Indo-Pacific. The drills begin with a high-level visit to India. America's Chief of Naval Operations is in New Delhi, Admiral Michael M. Gilday. He arrived on Monday for a 5-day visit. The focus is to strengthen the interoperability of the two navies. On the 15th of October, Admiral Gilday will meet Admiral Karambir Singh, who is India's Chief of Naval Staff. And China will be watching this meeting. And it's not the only development on the high seas that bothers Beijing. The United Kingdom, which recently formed the AUKUS with Australia and the US, has also deployed an aircraft carrier to the Indian Ocean, the HMS Queen Elizabeth. It arrived in Singapore on Monday with a carrier strike group on board. What's it doing there? Conducting naval exercises with Singapore. And Singapore is just the first stop. The aircraft carrier will be docking in at least 40 countries in the days ahead. What do all of these exercises, visits and deployments tell you? That the world is shifting its attention to the Indo-Pacific. World powers are trying to boost their presence in the region. The aim is to maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific and also to enhance engagement with India, Asia's third largest economy and the world's best bet in countering China. And the Indo-Pacific may be the big flashpoint of our times, but let's rewind the clock all the way back to the 20th century. Back then, all the talk was about Europe. Ruthless dictators, expansionism, wars, all of this chaos. Out of all of this chaos, a new Europe was born. A new political experiment was also born. It was called the European Union. But today, ideological differences are threatening the grand European experiment. Poland is challenging the supremacy of EU laws. Elections have unseated long-serving leaders, and the left-right ideological divide is widening in Europe. This is a threat to the very foundation of the European Union. How will Brussels deal with these challenges? Is the European experiment unraveling? Our next report tells you.
Europe is a continent divided between soft socialism and right-wing politics, between European unionism and national identities. It's a battle that is unfolding right here, on the streets of Warsaw in Poland. Last week, Poland's top court answered a big question. Which is superior? European laws or Polish laws? The court went with the latter. It put Poland's national laws above Europe's. Soon, speculation began. Was this Brexit 2.0? Would Poland leave the European Union? The government says it has no such plans. At the same time, it had a warning for Brussels. Respect member nations and treat them equally. This tussle is part of a long-standing dispute between the EU and Poland's ruling party. They want to reform Poland's judiciary, but Brussels fears these reforms will reduce their influence. The popular opinion is clear. Europe is the way to go. Tens of thousands of Poles are demonstrating on the streets. Their worry is this: if it can happen in Britain, it can happen in Poland.
It seems that just as Brexit suddenly became a fact that no one expected, the same may happen here.
At least Brexit sounded good. Polexit doesn't have the same hold. These protests could force the Polish government to rethink. It needs European funds and loans to recover from the pandemic. But Brussels cannot be complacent, because this trouble with Poland comes at a sensitive time. Two center-right European leaders have stepped down. One temporarily, the other for good. Austria's Chancellor Sebastian Kurz stepped aside this weekend. He has been accused of using public funds for positive media coverage. Kurz plans to fight the case out of office. The other resignation is actually a retirement. Angela Merkel will be leaving office by the end of this year, sooner if a coalition is announced. Her successor is likely to be a social democrat. So that's two center-right leaders out of power. But there is some consolation in the Czech Republic. Populist Prime Minister Andrej Babiš is headed for defeat. A center-right coalition is all set to take power. These changes of guard will create ripples in Brussels. The EU was designed for greater integration, to one day erase borders and create a single European entity. That project has hit a roadblock. The last century was marked by Europe's ideological battles. The EU was created to avoid a repeat. The question is, can these battles be contained in Brussels? Or is the European experiment unraveling? Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
There's been a robbery in the White House. Gifts given by other countries have gone missing. A second lady is being accused of taking a place card holder. A Secretary of State cannot account for a bottle of $6,000 scotch. A president, they say, has been trumped by the Saudis. The last one is particularly interesting. Let's start with that. Do you remember Donald Trump's trip to Saudi Arabia? It was his first foreign visit as US president. When Trump was returning home, the Crown Prince bagged Air Force One with gifts. There were 83 items in total: sandals, scarves, daggers, swords, fur, real fur. Trump was given 3 robes. They were made with fur from white tiger and cheetah. Trump was expected to disclose these expensive gifts upon arrival in Washington, D.C. He chose not to. Instead, the president clung on to these fur robes like a baby. The robes made officials uncomfortable. Possessing real fur could amount to violation of American law. On Trump's last day in office, he unwillingly handed over the fur. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services then seized them. They also made a surprise discovery. Experts realized the fur was fake. So did the Saudis play the president, or did the Saudis get played by a supplier, or was it all a petty conspiracy? It's hard to say. Countries give valuable gifts to foreign leaders like Russian vodka and Bangladeshi hilsa. When Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi went to the US recently, he gifted Vice President Kamala Harris a copy of her grandfather's employment notification. Every time Prime Minister Modi met Trump, he presented the president with a range of unique gifts: a Himachali silver bracelet, tea and honey from India's Kangra Valley, a Kashmiri shawl. But Trump was parading to and fro the White House in fake fur. Trump's presidency, in fact, was not the best time for America's diplomatic coffers. Some gifts turned out to be fake, some others went missing. Among them was a bottle of $5,800 Japanese whiskey. Japan gifted it to former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Pompeo says he never saw the bottle. Well, who drank the whiskey in it then? Then there was a 22-carat gold coin. Vietnam had given it to then National Security Advisor John Bolton. The coin is now missing. American law says it's illegal for an official to accept expensive gifts from foreigners. What qualifies as expensive? Anything that costs more than $415. Presidents must declare the gifts they receive, hand them over to the National Archives. The gifts are then kept there or transferred to the president's library upon his retirement. Sometimes, though, exceptions are made. A decade and a half ago, the National Archives received a call from the White House asking it to collect a puppy. The pooch had been gifted to President George W. Bush by the President of Bulgaria. A puppy is not the easiest thing to archive, we know, so it was placed with the Bush family. Northern Ireland had once given President Obama a packet of sea salt. Well, did it make to a bath or a salad bowl? We do not know. The Trumps received gifts worth $140,000 in their first year in office, more than $88,000 in 2018, and $120,000 in 2019. The long list included an Ottoman-era rifle worth $8,500, a bronze sculpture worth $7,200, a statue of Arabian oryx made of gold, diamond, and emerald from Qatar. The administration also received $37,000 in luxury watches. What happens if one of these gifts disappears in some officials' pockets, purses or bags. Is it treated as a case of theft? It is. An official, however, is allowed to buy a gift gifted to him or her. Hillary Clinton did that. She bought a $970 necklace gifted to her by Myanmar's then opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi. But straight out taking it home is a big no-no. It's not allowed. As we speak, a hunt is on for Donald Trump's or the Trump era missing gifts. 2 place card holders were traced to Karen Pence, the former second lady. Now, Pence says that she had consulted the White House ethics lawyer and she was told that she could have them. The State Department disagrees. There is still no information on the Japanese whiskey and the gold coin and many other such gifts. Well, what about the fake fur? What happened to it? Perhaps the National Archive will hang it in some museum wall as the relic of Donald Trump's disastrous diplomacy. For the moment, we turn to Ethiopia. Nobel laureate Abiy Ahmed is getting isolated, both at home and abroad. His citizens accuse him of launching a needless war. The United Nations criticizes him for an unprecedented expulsion of staff, UN staff. Now, more damaging revelations have come to light. Reports say the Ethiopian government used civilian aircraft to transport weapons for this war. Our next report tells you more.
It began as a political dispute, but now Ethiopia is caught in the middle of an all-out civil war. This is the Amhara community in northern Ethiopia. They buried 40 members of their village earlier this year. The locals say they were attacked by the military junta. Mohammed Said says his house was set on fire. Not everyone managed to come out alive.
I saw the junta and I ran away. I watched from the mountain as they burnt my house. Some children were killed, some were saved. I brought the survivors back.
These are the victims of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's civil war. The Nobel Peace Laureate had ordered the offensive last year. He went after the forces of Tigray People's Liberation Front, a dominant political party. They had ruled Ethiopia for almost 3 decades, but were sidelined by Abiy. The Ethiopian government has used every resource at its disposal to win the war. A recent investigation has found some shocking details. Reports say state carrier Ethiopian Airlines was used to transport weapons to the military during the civil war, a clear violation of the international aviation law. Tens of thousands of dollars worth of military items were moved at least 6 times. This includes guns and ammunition. Ethiopian Airlines has denied these claims. But the Abiy government finds itself cornered on the world stage. Last week, Ethiopia's ambassador had a tense confrontation with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Ethiopia accused UN workers of helping rebels in the country. 7 senior UN officials were expelled. The Secretary General hit back at the envoy with this.
If there is any written document provided by the Ethiopian government to any UN institution about any of the 8 members of the UN that were expelled, I would like to receive a copy of that document because I have not had any knowledge of any of them.
Mere words will not help. The civil war has pushed millions towards starvation in Tigray. The Abiy government has now launched a fresh offensive against the rebels. Ethiopia's humanitarian crisis will only get worse from here. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
I've said it in the past, and I can say it again, all things including religion must evolve with time. If some practices are outdated, they must end. And our next story is about one such practice that has no place in today's world, yet it continues to be enforced in the name of God. Let me show you this video. It's from Nigeria. It's very disturbing. It shows a young girl being lashed by 4 men. This video is not from a court or a police station. This, what you see here, is happening in a school in Nigeria's Kwara state. The girl you see is a student and she's been accused of drinking alcohol. So what does the school do? It gathers all its students and flogs the girl in Taliban style to set an example. It is unsettling to watch. I'll tell you what's worse. This punishment was carried out with the approval of the girl's parents. Apparently, the girl's father saw her drinking and he instructed the school to punish her. He has been quoted as saying this. Let me read it out for you. I informed the school about the incident and I personally requested them to give her the appropriate punishment, and I insisted I should be present when they carried it out. What kind of parent does such a thing? If a child does something wrong, there are 1,000 other ways to make them fix it. Getting them whipped in school is barbaric. And how does any school allow such a thing? It says it was only complying with the Islamic law. That's the school's defense, complying with the Islamic law, the same law that varies from country to country and is adjusted to suit those in power. It's outrageous how religion always becomes an excuse for brutality. Thankfully, the people of Nigeria do not agree with this punishment. They are condemning the school. They're calling for the arrest of the teachers and parents. What about the political leaders of Nigeria? The public anger has forced them to act. The Kwara state government has suspended the school's principal. It is investigating the actions of the parents. It has also set up a committee to deal with such cases. Now, here's the thing. Flogging may or may not be permitted in Islam. It may or may not be justified in the Quran. I don't even want to get into that debate right now. All I want to say is this. This is 2021. There is no place for such medieval practices in this day and age. And from Nigeria, let's turn to Iraq. Take a look at what's happening on the streets of Baghdad. Some people in Baghdad are celebrating early results of Sunday's parliamentary election. Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr's party has emerged as the biggest winner. Reports say al-Sadr has won over 70 seats in the 329-member parliament. So he has a lead with 70 seats. That's clearly not a majority. And this has not stopped al-Sadr's supporters from celebrating. There are others who are crying scam. Among them are pro-Iran parties. They say the polls were fabricated. There are many Iraqis who couldn't care less though. 24 million Iraqis were eligible to vote in this election. 24 million. Only 41% of them voted. Has Iraq lost faith in democracy? Well, from the looks of it, yes.
We are approaching the same members, the same bloc, the same sectarianism and the same approach. So that is why the new government will not deliver anything as long as we have the same parliament, political blocs and sectarian blocs.
Al-Sadr, for example, has been around in Iraq's political picture for decades now. Reports say before Saddam Hussein was sent to the gallows, some of al-Sadr's supporters surrounded the dictator. They jeered Saddam in his final moments and chanted slogans praising al-Sadr. The man has been Iraq's main political player since. Al-Sadr is basically a religious leader. He's evidently popular. For years he's been playing kingmaker. Today he's preparing for his coronation. Al-Sadr's message already has the undertone of a prime minister.
We welcome all embassies that do not interfere in Iraq's internal affairs, as well as the formation of the government. With any intervention, we will have a diplomatic response, or perhaps a popular one, which is suitable to the offence. Iraq is only for Iraqis.
Al-Sadr has reportedly called for US troop withdrawal from Iraq, and America, FYI, still maintains a force of 2,500 in the country. Washington says these troops are stationed there to fight ISIS. Iraq, in fact, has seen a lot in the last 2 decades. Flashback to 2003, the United States invaded Iraq, overthrew its Sunni dictator Saddam Hussein, promised democracy. Instead, sectarian religious parties captured power. They have won every election in Iraq since. And with every election, Iraq hit a new low in voter turnout. In 2013, the Islamic State captured at least a third of the country. It was defeated 4 years later. Then came a series of protests. In 2019, Iraq's streets were filled with protesters. Clashes followed. Several protesters were killed. The Prime Minister had to step down. Today, Iraq is fighting a series of problems. There is unemployment, there is no electricity or clean water for that matter. This is Iraq, 18 years since the fall of Saddam Hussein, 18 years since change was promised. Today, Iraq is as unhappy as an authoritarian state would be. And this was Iraq's 5th election since Saddam Hussein. It left observers worried.
This was supposed to be a fresh start, an opportunity to change the political landscape for a different future of this country. A majority that apparently, and also to me, unfortunately, did not believe in this opportunity.
Many Iraqis say their life has not improved since 2003. Iraq's infrastructure is in a shambles. The healthcare system needs serious upgradation. There aren't enough schools and colleges. How will life improve? Iraq is one of the exceptional cases where democracy has not delivered. The Iraq election is a developing story, and we'll keep you posted with the latest. For the moment, we'll turn to what's happening between Japan and South Korea. They're fighting again, this time over a plate of curry. A restaurant in Japan is serving a dish that looks like the Takeshima Islands. Now, this is disputed territory. Both countries, South Korea and Japan, stake claim over these islands. So South Korea finds this dish unsavory, but Japan says it's only giving the South Koreans a taste of their own medicine. Here's a report.
This simple bowl of curry has sparked a diplomatic fight. It is served at a restaurant on a Japanese island. But the dish has sparked outrage all the way in South Korea. Why are they angry? These 2 mounds of rice look exactly like the Takeshima Islands. This is disputed territory. The South Koreans control these islands. They call them Dokdo. But Japan says these islands are an integral part of its territory. The curry stakes Japan's claim. Each plate comes with a Japanese flag firmly planted in one of the mounds of rice. South Koreans find it unpalatable. A university professor in Seoul was asked about the dish. He says Japan has used a typical cheap trick to promote its claims. For once, Seoul has Pyongyang on its side. The North Korean state mouthpiece lashed out at Japan. It says the curry was created from the island nation's ingrained ambition to capture the territory and exercise militarism. Food seems to be the weapon of choice for both sides in this territorial battle. In 2017, South Korea had used shrimp to anger Japan. Seoul was hosting the then US President Donald Trump. He was served shrimp caught near the islands. Japan's diplomats protested the menu. The Japanese press called the banquet anti-Japanese. 4 years later, Japan has hit back with a dish of its own. Needless to say, it has left a bad taste in South Korean mouths. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
When I say superhero, who comes to your mind? Today we have dozens to choose from, but as they say, there's only one OG, the original, and that is Superman, aka Clark Kent. His comic book debut was in 1938, and even then Superman was a brand, strong morals, even stronger muscles, and a red cape. He also had a steady love interest, journalist extraordinary Lois Lane. Superman was the quintessential hero of the Western world. Tall, white and straight. Well, not anymore. The new Superman is bisexual. And I'm not talking about Clark Kent, I'm talking about his son John Kent. In the latest DC comics, Clark is no longer Superman. His son John has taken the mantle. The new Superman comes out as bisexual. His love interest is Jay Nakamura, a fellow reporter. It's certainly a bold move because Superman is not just a character, he's a monolith. But the writers say that's exactly why they did this.
Yeah, look, it's not a gimmick. It's when I was offered this job, I thought, well, if we're going to have a new Superman for the DC universe, well, it feels like a missed opportunity to have another straight white savior. So while this isn't everything to do with him, and there's a reason this is coming in issue 5, not issue 1. We didn't want this to be DC Comics creates new queer Superman. We want this to be Superman finds himself, becomes Superman, and then comes out. And I think there's a really important distinction there.
That's what the writers say. But what about the public response? It's highly divided. Some social media users say everything is not about sexuality. You watch a movie for entertainment. Yes, you do. But others were outright enraged. They say Superman simply cannot be bisexual. His morals are straight, and so is he. How do you respond to this criticism? One Superman fan had an interesting take. If you are bisexual, it doesn't mean your father is also bisexual. Well, fair point. The writers have struck an important balance here. Clark Kent and his character is unchanged. He's probably happily married. Instead, the writers have introduced a new character, their son John Kent. He's a millennial. He's growing up in the 21st century, and his character reflects that. John Kent campaigns for climate action. He fights military brutality. And he gets arrested for a protest for refugee resettlement. John Kent is basically woke Superman. The question is that really a bad thing? There are more than 25,000 superheroes and supervillains in comic books. Almost all of them are straight characters. What are the odds of that? The fact is, fictional heroes have been stereotyped. As I said, tall, white and straight. And the result is this. Many communities have been underrepresented, not just the LGBTQ community, but the black community, the Asian community. None of them end up as superheroes. We've all heard about the West's savior complex. Well, this is the perfect example. The world is in trouble, and here comes the white superhero. Until now, Hollywood has also stuck to this script. They have tweaked comic characters to avoid uncomfortable discussions. I'll give you some examples. Everyone is familiar with this guy, Loki, the god of mischief. He's one of the most popular characters in Marvel. The comics depict him as bisexual, but the movies never did. 6 Marvel films glossed over his sexuality. Another example is Deadpool. The comics depict him as pansexual. What about the movies? A heterosexual vigilante. I know what some of you are thinking. Why sexualize comics at all? Why bring romance into it at all? Well, we've been doing it for decades, and people don't seem to have a problem with the romance. They have a problem with the partners. They're fine with heroes in heterosexual relationships, but not same-sex ones. So how do you work around this problem? Well, fans feel strongly about their heroes, so a sudden change in character may come as a shock. The alternative is what Superman has done, introduce a new character, equally symbolic and equally powerful. Getting a consensus here is nearly impossible, but the fact is you cannot stop the march of time. Superman was a refugee from another planet. Today his son is fighting for refugees on Earth. It's a natural progression. Problems arise when you edit an existing character. Well, that's dangerous stuff. And the perfect example is Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling. I mean, look at some of the changes they've made. Harry's uncle supported Brexit now. Hermione is not white, and Dumbledore was gay. This is not progressive thought. It's an afterthought. The idea is not to alter old characters or change their legacy. It is to create new characters equally powerful but more diverse. So bisexual Superman is not the end of the world. It's the sign of a changing world. Think about it. We'll leave you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.